The blue light from the security monitors flickered across the desk, casting long, rhythmic shadows against the back wall of the office. Marcus sat perfectly still, his eyes locked on the digital interface of his bank account. The balance displayed a single, jagged zero. Outside the reinforced glass, the city pulsed with neon energy, a constant stream of movement and commerce that felt 1,000 miles away from his desk. He tapped the screen, but the number did not change. It was a cold, static reality that drained the air from the room. He leaned back, listening to the hum of the ventilation system, the only sound in the dead space of the graveyard shift. Every light across the skyline represented someone else's progress, someone else's movement, while he remained anchored to this seat, pinned down by the weight of a life that barely covered the cost of its own existence. The realization settled in his chest, a heavy, grinding pressure that made the office feel smaller with every passing minute. He was not just working, he was running in place, tethered to a cycle that threatened to remain unbroken for the rest of his life. Marcus reached into his side drawer and pulled out a worn notebook. The paper was rough, the edges curled from constant use. He found a blank page, pressed the ballpoint pen down until the tip nearly punctured the surface, and began to write. His hand did not shake. He wrote a single sentence: "I will be financially independent by 50. He counted the years. 24. The number sat on the page, staring back at him, devoid of emotion. It was a contract. That night, the cycle of paycheck to paycheck living stopped being a trap. It became a test. He closed the notebook and set it beside the monitor. The air in the room felt different now, less like a cage and more like a training ground. He looked at the city lights again, but he no longer saw them as symbols of his own exclusion. He saw them as a map. He checked his watch. The shift had 4 hours left. He did not lean back. He sat upright, hands resting on the desk, observing the security feeds with a new, narrowed focus. The exhaustion that usually defined his nights had been replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. He was no longer waiting for the end of the shift. He was starting the clock. The break room was filled with the sound of stale coffee and complaints about rising rents. Marcus sat at the edge of the plastic table, his notebook open, recording the cost of his lunch, a single apple and a piece of bread. When a coworker slid a paper cup of expensive mocha toward him, Marcus shook his head and pushed it back. He did not explain the compounding cost of that daily habit or the 3% interest he could earn instead. He simply looked at his ledger. The coworker laughed, turning back to the group to recount the latest landlord dispute. Marcus remained silent, his pen moving across the page with clinical precision. He tracked every cent, turning his daily routine into a series of calculated inputs. The isolation felt physical, a cold barrier between his goals and their complaints. He watched the clock tick down, his mind already calculating the difference between a life of convenience and a life of assets. He wasn't participating in their shared misery anymore. He was building something they could not see, a foundation laid in the minutes they wasted and the dollars they threw away. As they stood up to head back to the floor, Marcus finished his entry, closed his ledger, and locked it in his bag. The distance between them had never been wider. The office hummed with the steady drone of cooling fans. Marcus sat at the console, adjusted his earpiece, and pressed play. Instead of the local radio, a voice began explaining the mechanics of compounding interest. He watched the security feeds with one eye while his mind traced the trajectory of capital growth. When a camera in the loading bay flickered and went dark, he logged the fault with a single keystroke, his attention barely wavering from the lecture. He was no longer just a guard watching doors. He was a student processing complex systems. He took notes in the margins of his notebook, sketching out growth charts that spanned decades. The information felt like a physical tool, a key he was sharpening against the grindstone of his shifts. He spent hours analyzing the difference between linear wage growth and exponential asset accumulation. The security monitors showed the same empty halls, but in his mind he was navigating a different landscape. He was building a mental engine, piece by piece, fueled by the data flowing into his ears. Every shift brought a new lesson. Every break was a lecture. He was systematically dismantling the ignorance that kept his peers tethered to their paychecks. At 35, the screen on Marcus's desk displayed a green line that had climbed steadily for a decade. He checked his portfolio balance, the numbers reflecting years of redirected salary and disciplined reinvestment. It was a substantial sum, a machine of his own making. Then, the ticker began to stutter. A red flash pulsed across the corner of the monitor. He pulled up a news feed, scanning the headlines that scrolled in rapid, jagged bursts. The market was contracting. He watched the indices slide, first by fractions, then by whole points. The air in the security office felt heavy, the constant hum of the server rack suddenly sounding like a warning. He checked the loading bay cameras, but his mind stayed on the volatility of the numbers. He looked at the accumulated assets on his tablet, then back at the shifting red sea of the market. The reports grew more frequent, each one signaling a deeper fracture in the economic landscape. He tightened his grip on his pen, recording the day's losses with a hand that did not shake, but his eyes stayed fixed on the monitor. The storm was no longer a distant possibility. It was visible in every flickering digit, threatening to undo the architecture of his future. The ticker on the main monitor turned a violent, solid red. It did not slide. It plummeted. Marcus watched the indices drop with a mechanical, relentless speed. First, the gains of the last year vanished, then the year before that. He refreshed the page, but the numbers only shifted lower. The market was not just correcting, it was hemorrhaging. He saw his total portfolio value blink on the secondary screen, the digits shrinking with every passing second. Each refresh erased months of sacrifice. He leaned forward, his face illuminated by the harsh glow of the falling graphs, his breath catching in his throat. The security office, usually a place of quiet control, felt like a sinking ship. He clicked through the account history, seeing the cumulative losses pile up until they dwarfed his annual salary. He gripped the edge of the metal desk, his knuckles turning white. As the final barrier of his financial security cracked under the weight of the sell-off, he sat in total silence, watching the numbers drain away, the reality of the crash carving a cold, hard line through his carefully constructed future. Everything he had built was being shredded, pixel by pixel, before his eyes. The panic hit the building floor in waves. Outside the office, the construction crew had stopped work, their voices rising in a frantic chorus of alarm as news of the crash reached their radios. Marcus ignored them. He kept his eyes locked on the blinking cursor of his broker terminal. The market was a bottomless pit, and the screen told him to run. He did the opposite. His fingers moved across the keyboard with a rhythm that defied the chaos. He bypassed the warning prompts, the red status bars, and the automated suggestions to liquidate. He selected the buy order for his entire remaining cash reserve. His pulse was a steady thrum in his ears. He pressed enter. The transaction confirmation flashed on the screen, a small, white square in the middle of a sea of crimson data. It was a transfer of everything he had left into the very assets that were currently in freefall. He sat back, his back hitting the chair, and watched the order status change from pending to filled. The building still echoed with the shouts of those rushing to sell, but the office was silent. He had gambled his safety on the belief that the floor would hold. He took a long, slow breath, closed the trading window, and returned his gaze to the security monitors, his hands finally still. The recovery did not happen in a day. It was a slow, grinding crawl back toward the light. Marcus tracked the indices with the same rigid discipline he had used to endure the crash. Slowly, the red turned to black, then to green. The portfolio did not just recover. It began to expand beyond its previous peaks. One Tuesday morning, a notification pinged on his secondary screen. A dividend payment had landed. It was small, but it was earned without a single minute of extra labor. He watched the balance update, the number ticking upward like a steady heartbeat. This was the machine, finally catching its rhythm. He calculated the yield against his hourly guard wage. The gap was narrowing. He stopped checking the market every hour, then every day. The system was now self-sustaining. He walked the perimeter of the construction site, his boots crunching on the gravel, and looked up at the steel frame of the building. He was no longer trading his hours for survival. He was watching his capital replicate itself. Every night, the ledger grew. Every morning, the math confirmed the shift. He had built a structure that did not sleep, did not tire, and did not stop working when he walked away from the screen. The office was silent, save for the rhythmic hum of the server banks. Marcus sat at the desk, his tablet held steady in the low blue light of the security feed. It was his 50th year, and the midnight patrol felt different. He opened the ledger, a habit etched into his routine over decades. On the left, the hourly wage of his guard post, fixed and stagnant. On the right, the column of passive dividends, growing with the quiet persistence of interest. He scrolled through the final entries of the month. The numbers had crossed the threshold. The income from his assets now dwarfed the pay for his shift. He looked up from the screen at the rows of blinking monitors. He had spent 24 years watching over these halls, securing property that never belonged to him. Now, the math on his screen proved he had finally secured something else entirely. He tapped the screen off, leaving the room in darkness. The weight of the badge on his hip felt trivial, a relic of a cycle he had already broken. He stood up, the chair creaking against the floorboards. There was no need to check the perimeter again. The machine he had built was working, and for the first time, he was entirely free to walk away. Marcus walked down the long, linoleum-floored corridor. His footsteps echoed in the stillness of the early morning. He reached the manager's office, pushed the heavy door open, and stepped inside. The manager looked up from a pile of reports, startled by the early visit. Marcus did not offer an explanation or an excuse. He unclipped the badge from his belt and set it on the desk. The metal hit the wood with a sharp, final sound. He turned and walked out before the manager could speak. He moved toward the main exit, his pace steady, his breath coming easy. He pushed the heavy glass doors open and stepped onto the sidewalk. The city was just beginning to wake. The first light of the sun broke over the horizon, painting the steel towers in shades of gold and amber. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool air hit his lungs. He looked at his hands, then back at the building he had watched for 24 years. He was not walking away from a job. He was walking into a life he had financed with his own discipline. He turned his back on the guard post and started walking, not toward a shift, but toward his own time. The horizon was clear. The path was entirely his own.